Welcome to Divcasts from University of Chicago Divinity School. For more of our podcasts and information about our terms of use, please see our website, divinity.uchicago.edu/podcasts.
Guest for today is Sliman Bensmaia. I worry a lot about saying that, but I think I got it right.
Well.
Thank you very much. He's assistant professor in the Department of Organismal Biology and Anatomy, and he studies the neural basis of the sense of touch, research that could lead to direct interface with the brain that could someday allow people who have lost a limb to actually feel things again. That's it in a nutshell. I'm going to let Professor Bensmaia introduce the rest of his work.
I have a community announcement. My band is playing bars on Saturday night. If you want to attend, you should check it out. It's like instrumental song. Okay, so actually what I'm going to talk about today is not really my main, the main program of research in my lab. What I study mostly is the sense of touch, actually the somatic sensation in general. So the sense of touch, and also where you can track where your body is in space. So I can move your arm, you can close your eyes, I can move your arm, your hand. And you can sort of sense where it is, so something in your nervous system is tracking how that's happening. And so we're interested in understanding the signals that the hand sends the brain about the movements of the hand, the consequences of those movements, about objects grasped in the hands, and how then the brain sort of interprets these signals to culminate in these tactile and proprioceptive percepts. What I'm going to talk about today is sort of an application. So, you know, I've been a scientist for 20-ish years, and for the first time, I got an opportunity to do something that might actually be useful. And I love doing useless stuff. It's great. I'm very passionate about the pure science stuff, but occasionally you can actually do something that's going to help someone, so that's pretty exciting, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. So first, let me talk about touch. You know, you probably don't spend a lot of time thinking about it, unless you're me and like 5 other people in the world. But you know, touch is actually critical in everything you do, right? You have these signals from your hand that tell you what your hand is doing, what it's touching, how it's touching it, giving you very precise information about what your hand is doing. And without this information, you would suck at everything, right? So here's my undergraduate example. There's probably no undergrads here, but I'll start easy and then we'll move up from there. You know, you're at a party, right? And you're holding a beer if you're of age, and you're talking to someone, and you don't have to pay attention to visually monitor your hand to make sure your beer is in your hand the whole time. And that's because you have a sense of touch, right? So that's the undergraduate example. But more importantly, you know, when you're typing on your keyboard, you're looking at the monitor, you're not monitoring, you know, especially when you larger type, you're not monitoring your hand virtually at all. Oops. And again, you're making all these micro adjustments of your hand that are allowing you to not have it to focus on your hand. You grab a pen, you're focusing on what you're writing, you're not making sure the pen is at the right orientation in your hand, etc. So all these signals from your hand constantly tell you, or allow you to manipulate objects. We have this dexterous ability to do things with our hands. Without this sensory feedback from the hand, we wouldn't have those abilities. And I'm going to give you this. This is a little hard to watch. If you have a heart condition, you might want to look away. I'm kidding. It's not that much. It's a little frustrating. So this is somebody just taking a match and lighting a match. No problem. Hopefully you can see that. Perfectly normal, healthy, sober individual. Now the same person, minutes later, is going to do the same thing, except this time we're going to, this is my colleague in Sweden, we're going to numb the fingertips. So everything is normal again. She hasn't chugged a lot of liquor. She can see her hand. Everything is fine. The only thing that's different is her fingertip is numb. It's very frustrating to watch, I think. Yes! But the point is that I feel like that gives you a visceral understanding of how important your sense of touch is. Again, the motor system is intact, everything is normal, just the fingertips are numb. So now in the context of what I'm going to be talking about today, we're talking about neuroprosthetics, right? And so, the target populations are individuals with tetraplegia first and foremost, and amputees. And this movie just shows this amazing robotic limb that the group I work with has developed. And it's an anthropomorphic robotic limb that basically moves in all the same ways that your arm moves. I mean, it's mostly has all the functionality that your arm has. It has one piece of functionality that your arm does not have. You can crush a tennis ball. But you've seen Terminator, you've seen RoboCop. The future is now with these arms. And the idea, though, the idea behind these arms is to deploy them initially in a tetraplegic population where, and this has already happened, you stick electrodes in the motor parts of their brains, right? And so, in a tetraplegic patient, the brain is intact, the body is intact, but the brain is no longer attached to the body, right? So but the signals that control the arm, that send signals to the arm muscles to tell it what to do, they're still there, they're still intact. And there's a whole cottage industry of labs that have developed ways to sort of, and I'm not going to go into that, but that have developed ways to infer motor intention from these patterns of activity in the motor cortex, in these motor parts of the brain. So, when you move your arm that way, there's a specific pattern of activity in the brain. You move your arm that way, there's another pattern of activity in the brain. And there's these labs that have learned, have developed mathematical models to map patterns of activation in the brain with desired movements of the arm, and then you just make the robotic arm do these movements, right? So that's already happened. Except for the reasons that hopefully I've convinced you, these arms are basically useless from a clinical standpoint because you can control your arm all you want, but if you don't get this feedback from it, it's hard to use. It's extremely difficult to use. And you see the movies and they're staggering from a scientific standpoint. You see somebody controlling a robot with their brain, that's cool. But it's useless in real life because it's just so much effort that it's not even worth doing, right? So what I've been tasked, and this is a project that's part of this much bigger initiative called Revolutionizing Prosthetics, what I've been tasked with is to kind of leverage my expertise in how the brain processes information from the hand to try to reproduce those naturalistic patterns of activation in the brain to sort of restore the sense of touch. So the idea is, basically the goal, and I'll get back to it later, is when this patient grasps an object, to actually feel the object, and ideally feel the object in the same way you would feel that object, right? So that's the primary goal. So I'm going to give you I'm going to show you, I'm going to try to give you a flavor of what we do. I'm going to sort of skip a lot of the technical details. We work on monkeys. We work on rhesus macaques. If we had human patients, this would be a lot easier because we could zap their brain and say, how did that feel? Unfortunately, with macaques, you can't really do that. So instead, what we do is we train these animals to do tasks based on stimulation of their native hand. And then we surreptitiously replace some, so the idea is we poke their hands and have them discriminate these pokes, and we'll give you some examples of that in a minute. And then what we do is we surreptitiously replace some of these pokes with electrical stimuli targeted towards in the brain, and see if they respond as if we had poked their hand in a specific way. Right? So that's the general kind of hand wavy approach. What I'm going to talk about, we start, first of all, when I was approached by, people from the Department of Defense to do this, I was like, that's crazy, I don't have time for this crazy talk. And then, then they told me what kind of resources they're going to deploy towards this. But we wanted to start easy. We want to start basic. Like, if you grasp an object, what is the basic information you need to know about this object? Well, you need to know that you're touching it, right? You need to know what part of your hand is touching it. So a minimum, if you want to pick it up, you have to have your thumb and one of your other digits holding the object. And you want to know how much force you're exerting on it because you don't want to crush it, but you want to exert just enough force so that when you pick it up, it doesn't slip from your grasp. So that those are the basic. That's the basic sensory information you need to have in order to do anything, to grasp an object. So I might not get through all of this, but I'll give you a flavor of how we approach these different questions. So our approach, though, consists in, okay, when you with your intact limb, grasp an object, what is the pattern of activation in the brain? It's very simple-minded in this respect. What is the pattern of activation in the brain? And what my goal is to try to reproduce that pattern of activation in the brain of these macaques and ultimately these patients by sending little currents of electrical currents into the brain. The point is, it's what we call biomimetic. We're trying to reproduce natural patterns of neural activation. So our approach, these are the relevant structures in the brain. So these are the parts of the brain that receive input from the hand. What we do is we implant two kinds of electrode arrays. So these are basically beds of nails that we implant into the brain, which shockingly enough does not seem to damage the brain very significantly. And it allows us to both record and stimulate from these neuronal populations. This is a surgical image, just to show you. It's probably not that interesting to you. The cool thing, though, one of my favorite things about the somatosensory system in these parts of the brain is you stick your electrode in the brain, and then you palpate the animal, try to figure out, hopefully you're in the hand representation, so you palpate the hand. And what you find is, when you're listening to the activity from one of these electrodes, typically, if you touch one of the fingers, you get activation. You can hear that every time you touch the finger, the electrodes become activated. And so you can do that with each electrode in turn, and you see that there's a perfect representation of the hand. In fact, there is a full representation of the body. In fact, there are 4 full representations of the body in this image. I'm going to focus on the hand representations. So this just shows, this is our two of the electrodes. This is our 10 by 10 electrode array, and this is our 4 by 4 electrode array. This is just a cartoon of a color mapped cartoon of the hand. And what you can see is the blue electrodes respond to the palm, these electrodes down here respond to the middle finger, etc. So there's this sort of systematic map of the hand in this part of the brain, right? And by the way, ask questions if you have any. I welcome interruptions. So that's where we're at. We stuck our electrode array in the brain. We've managed to put the electrodes in the right place, so we're impinging upon the hand representation in this part of the brain that basically receives. So this is the part of the brain that naturally receives input from the hand. So now about contact location. How do you convey to an animal or to a patient where an object is touching the hand, right? Well, as I said, there's these 4 body maps in these areas. Let's just say there's a body map in these areas. And so there is a population of neurons that responds to the index finger that's next to a population of neurons that responds to the middle finger, next to a population of neurons that responds to the ring finger, etc. Right? So the question was, if we stimulate a population of neurons that responds to the index finger, will the animal feel as if its index finger was touched, right? So this was the first set of experiments. Of course, again, in a human patient, that would be trivially easy to say, hey, where did you feel that? Oh yeah, it's on my index, good to go. But in monkey experiments, you have to sort of infer that. So what we did is we trained these animals, and this took about 6 months. We trained the animals to do a task where we poke them in 2 places on the hand. Right? We have this nice fancy stimulator, which I may or may not show you later, where we poke them two times on the hand. If the second poke was to the right of the first, the animal looks right. We're tracking the animal's arm movements. And if the second poke was to the left of the first, they look left. Right? And so we can train them to do this task. Oh, this is, I forgot I have a little animation of that. So this is, the correct answer there would be right, and then you can have the reverse, where the correct answer there would be left. And then, when the animals are fully trained on this task, we have them do a version of this task where first we poke their hand, and then we stimulate, so here in this case we're poking their middle finger. And then we stimulate a part of through an electrode that responds to the ring finger, right? And on the left hand, that's to the right of the middle finger. And the correct answer on those trials is right. And then we can then infer from the animal's response whether they actually did feel that electrical stimulus applied through that electrode on the finger that we think it should be felt on, right? And so the key is, so this is a technical point, the key is we bombarded the animals with a bunch of different locations on the hand, a bunch of different electrodes, so they couldn't learn anything about the electrical stimuli. They had to really do this task based on where these electrical stimuli are felt. So that's a technical point that I think is very important, but so that's why I'm mentioning it in passing. But here's the take-home message, right? So this is the performance of the animals when we're poking their hand, right? And they're about at 80, 85, 90%. Well, some of these are pretty hard, some of these are kind of easier. If they're close, it's hard. If it's far, it's easier. But also animals, they get distracted and stuff. That's why they're not at 100%. This would be a trivially easy for all of you if you were paying attention. But now, so these are the trials where we place one of these pokes with an electrical stimulus applied to an electrode, and you can see. So there's two different areas. This is probably a non-interesting technical point, but there are two different areas. I told you there are 4 body maps. We use 2 of them, and when we stimulate one of these areas, the animal performed equally well, whether we poked its hand or whether we electrically stimulated through an electrode. And to make a long story short, the take-home message of that, and definitely in all cases a chance, if the animal just had this totally diffuse, non-spatially localized percept, they would be a chance, which would be at 50%. So in all cases, the animals were way above chance. Right? So the point being that the inescapable conclusion of this is that stimulation through individual electrodes in this area of the brain produces very spatially localized percepts. So if I stimulate the index distal finger pad representation, I get a percept that is localized. It feels like something touched the index finger pad. Right, so this is kind of interesting from a scientific standpoint, but it's also important for neuroprosthetics. And I'll try to kind of tie this all together later. But the take-home message of everything I've said so far is that intracortical microstimulation is what ICMS stands for. Stimulating through individual electrodes in this area creates these very localized percepts, right? I stimulate through one electrode, and if something feels like I touch my hand here, stimulate another electrode, and it feels like it touches my hand here, and I can predict which part of my hand is going to touch based on which part of my hand these neurons naturally respond to. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Questions about that? Okay, so that's cool. Another important thing is contact force. You want to exert enough force, as I mentioned earlier. You have to exert enough force on an object so that you don't drop it, but not so much force that you could crush it, and this thing can crush it. Tennis ball. But imagine you're like, hey, how you doing? Trying to shake this guy's hand with a robotic hand. You want to make sure he doesn't crush your hand and break every bone in it. So you need to have this information about contact force. And so the idea, I'll try to give you an intuition. I'm going to skip because there's a lot of technical stuff that went into it, but I think the proof is in the pudding. This is going to be a proof is in the pudding kind of presentation here. But the intuition is, what is the sensory correlate of contact force, right? Then you have to say, touch you lightly, you get this very faint sensation, and if I jam my finger into you, you're going to have a very strong sensation. So you're going to have this sensation magnitude is modulated by the force that is exerted on the skin. And now if you look in the brain, what happens is if I indent the skin a little bit, you have this very faint, localized pattern of activation. And if I indent your skin a lot more than that, or more strongly, you get a much more diffuse and much stronger pattern of activation. And it just so happens that if you crank up the juice on your electrical stimulator, that's exactly what happens. Right, so we did a bunch of experiments that I'm not going to go into because that would take at least half an hour to get into. But they're very cool and very carefully and well done. Just sticking out for it. But the outcome of these experiments is this function. It's what I call a psychometric equivalence function. In fact, this is a family of psychometric equivalence functions. And to give you a flavor of what this means, each of these curves here, like let's just focus on these here. The two colors are two different animals, but each of these curves correspond, or any point on each of these curves corresponds to stimuli that are equally intense. So for instance, if I present a 200 micron, so a fifth of a millimeter indentation into the skin, you get a relatively faint sensation. And if you want to create a sensation that's equally faint, or equally strong, however you want to look at it, you need to pump about 42 microamps of current into the brain, 43 or whatever. Now if you want a stronger, like an 800 micron, like a millimeter say, if you want to create a sensation that's equivalent to jamming a stimulus a millimeter into your skin,
then you need 80 microamps, right? So it's a mapping between electrical and mechanical stimulation that results in the same perception. A lot of work came into this thing, but if you don't quite get it yet, hopefully you're going to get it in a second. Because what we did is we tested these functions, right? By the way, I should say, this is exactly the mapping you want in the prosthesis, right? In the prosthesis, you have the time-varying force output of these sensors on the prosthesis, and that sort of indicate how much force is being exerted on an object. And what you want is to convert this force output into a pattern of electrical stimulation that creates an appropriate percept, right? A percept of appropriate intensity given the pressure that's being exerted on this force sensor. Anyways, if that doesn't make sense, hopefully this will. So we did this fun experiment where what we did, so the animal, oh, I forgot to mention, in these experiments, actually this is as good a time as any to mention it. In these experiments, we were poking the hair of these animals, right? But now instead of poking in two different spots, we poke them in the same spot with different forces, right? And if the second poke was stronger than the first, they would stick out right, they would look right. And if the first poke was stronger than the second, they would look left, right? So they learned, they were discriminating the pressure that was being exerted on their hand. So they learned this task. And then we had them do the exact same task, but instead of poking their hand, we poked a prosthetic hand with a force sensor on it. And we took the force sensor output in real time, which tells you the time varying force being exerted on that sensor, and converted it in real time in a pattern of electrical stimulation based on this function that I showed you. In other words, we were having the animal do this pressure discrimination test, but instead of poking its hand, we were poking a prosthetic hand. Of course, the animal can't see either, right? It's just trying to feel things. Right? And what we were hoping for, the goal was to get the animal to perform just as well as this pressure discrimination task, to be able to discriminate pressure just as well, whether we're poking its hand or poking a prosthetic hand. Of course, I wouldn't be here if it hadn't worked. But so the dark trace, the dark purple trace or whatever, that's the performance of the animal when we're poking its hand. So in these tasks, we're presenting again two stimuli. One of them is, so this is the depth of indentation into the skin. One of them is always 150 microns. So it's like roughly a sixth to an eighth of a millimeter. And the other one varies from about 300 to 2,000. So a third of a millimeter to about 2 millimeters, right? And of course, as the other one gets more and more intense, more and more different, the animal gets better and better at distinguishing which one of them sort of cause more pressure on the skin, right? So you get this increasing function. In this case, it's the same idea, except now the stimulus that's presented on every trial is 2 millimeters. So, these stimuli are the most different because they're much fainter than 2 millimeters. And as the amplitude increases, it gets closer and closer to 2 millimeters, the performance of the animal decreases, right? Anyway, the take-home message of this is now you have the animal doing the exact same task, interleaved, right, with the task I just described. But instead of poking its hand, we're poking its prosthetic hand, and lo and behold, the animal just does just as well. So the magenta traces show two different electrodes the animal doing the same task, but we're poking its prosthetic hand. And as you can see, the animal's performance is indistinguishable. So what that means is sort of a proof in the pudding sort of thing. And trust me when I tell you, there's a lot of other experiments that we did. So if you don't buy that, you're very, very skeptical. But there's other experiments that we did. But so that proves, right, really proves beyond the shadow of a doubt, as far as I'm concerned, that these functions work, right? That means that we can create, if I can create a perception of a specific pressure by electrically stimulating the brain using this function. So if you say, hey, I want you to give me a percept of 2 newtons, I can create a percept that corresponds to 2 newtons. That has the same sensation magnitude as if I poked you with 2 newtons. The other thing we did, just to make sure that we're not in la-la land, is we had the animal compare a poke to an electrical stimulus evoked in the skin, and the animal could do that also. So I'm flying through this. That's good. I'm almost done. So let's go back to what this means for prosthetics. The other thing I should mention, I might not have made clear, is this was not like proof of principle, let's have fun with, electrically stimulating the brain. This was part of a DARPA project, Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, where they're like, in 3 years, we're going to have a human patient, and we want to know exactly what to do with this human patient, right? So we had to really have a clear mapping of how this would then translate into human trials. So this is, again, the arm. So how would this work in a tetraplegic patient, right? So you implant electrodes in motor cortex, as has been done a few times in the past. But now you implant electrodes into somatosensory cortex. Now remember, we can't map the hand like we could with these monkeys, right? Figure out, okay, what part of the body does each electrode respond to, because the body is no longer attached to that part of the brain. But what we've shown is if we electrically stimulate to a given electrode, it's going to be perceived as being a touch somewhere on the hand. So imagine now, I have my patient, the patient has recovered from surgery, I electrically stimulate through electrode 36, and the patient says, oh, I felt something on my index finger. Then I attach the force sensor on the index finger, the prosthetic index finger, to that electrode. So anytime the index finger is touched, we pump some current through electrode 36. And we know that it will be perceived as emanating from the index. Now what do? You have this time varying force output. What do you do with this force output? Well, you pump it through our psychometric equivalence functions, which will then track the force that is exerted on that sensor, on that fingertip sensor. So that when a lot of force is exerted on it, we'll pump a lot more current than when a light force is exerted on it, and we can really know exactly what amount of current to pump in through that electrode because of our psychometric equivalence functions, right? So this is all fun and games with monkeys, but the really exciting thing is that all this stuff, we package this up in another study I'm not going to talk about it because it's super boring, but it's a safety study. We're pumping current through the brain. Is that safe? But it turns out it is. We did a study to demonstrate that it was. So we took these data, we took the data of pumping current through the brain for 6 months and assaying the damage, if any, it did on the brain, and sent that to the FDA. Because of course, when you're going to do this kind of invasive surgery on human patients, you better be damn sure that it's efficacious and safe. And lo and behold, the FDA approved it. So actually, as we speak now, currently our colleagues at Caltech and Pitt are recruiting tetraplegic patients to be the first patients in the history of mankind to actually feel things through robotic hands. By the way, my monkeys were the first to ever feel things through robotic hands, but now it's going to be the first human patients to feel things through robotic hands. So that's pretty exciting. And again, about a year, there'll be a 90-minute special. You should check it out. This is the lab, so I just want to bring attention. This is a very technically challenging project with all kinds of complex and sort of beta testing stage pieces of apparatus. This guy here made that all work. This guy, Terry and Oksana, really collected a lot of the data, as well as alumni from the lab. This guy analyzed a lot of the data and has a nice publication in PNAS to show for it. So they do all the work. I just bring it clear. So lab meetings. And then, and of course, this is a hugely interdisciplinary and interinstitutional project. My bit is on the monkey experiments on cortical stimulation to restore touch. But of course, other people are going to do the human experiments. Other people are working on the motor side. Some people are working on developing the arm, especially Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Lab, and kind of interfacing the arm with all the software. By the way, this arm weighs as much as your arm. Power is included, the battery is included, the motors and all that stuff. It's a non-trivial engineering feat. And these are my friend resources. Thanks for your attention.
We do have some time for Q&A.
Thanks, this was excellent. I really enjoyed it. One question I had that I wasn't quite sure on your monkey experiments, the role of sight, like what they could see and what they couldn't. If you talk a little bit about that, and then secondly, just Does your research shed any light on phantom pains for amputees?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the phantom pain because that gets really cool very quickly when you go there. So the first thing is sight. They're using their eyes. They're fixating on the monitor, and they're using their eyes to respond. And the reason why they're using their eyes to respond and not something else is because if they were using a physical manipulator to respond, that would create some sensory responses, and we didn't want to deal with that. Also, it vibrates because monkeys are not super, they're not gentle. They're like, and then everything's like shaking. Now, phantom pain, right? So, I've been focusing on tetraplegic patients, and this definitely has important implications for amputees. It's just tetraplegia is such a devastating condition that tetraplegic patients are like, yeah, you can poke holes in my brain to make this, or in my skull to try this. Whereas amputees are going to be a target population only when this stuff is really just working like gangbusters. That being said, though, so phantom pain is if you get an amputated, the part of your brain that actually responded to your arm is still there, right? And it doesn't really know that your arm isn't there anymore. So there's the sensations, anytime this part of the brain is active, it's projected to this arm that's no longer there, right? So, and there's evidence that to suggest that if you actually now stick an electrode array and now associate activation in this brain, in the brain area that used to represent the arm, with stimulation of this robot, or anytime the robot touches something, you feel a sort of an appropriate sensation. Then that sensation migrates away from the phantom limb and starts being projected to the arm. In other words, the arm becomes embodied. The arm, this robotic hand becomes part of your body. And that's happening, that's already been demonstrated in amputees, actually. Not through brain stimulation, but through nerve stimulation. I had a question.
The mechanical means by which the touch to the prosthetic limb is transferred to the monkey's brain is not actually mechanical. You're just stimulating the electrode in the appropriate part of the brain.
That's right. So we're taking, we take the output of the force sensor, send it to a computer. The computer uses our psychometric equivalence function to figure out how much to stimulate the brain, and then we stimulate the brain accordingly. And then all this in real time, like with a 20 millisecond sort of resolution.
So there's no mechanical connection at all between the monkey and the prosthetic limb.
No. But I mean, even in you, there wouldn't be a mechanical, right? I touch your hand, and then it's like nerve signals, electrochemical signals that are transmitted to the brain. Well, here we're just kind of replacing these electrochemical signals to the brain with electrical signals directly into the brain.
I have personal experience with the sense of touch, I mean, sense of location. My sense of location isn't that accurate. If I'm in a bus where I reach for a rail for safety, if I'm not looking at it, I end up coming short.
So the neural basis of proprioception is not very well understood at all. In fact, that's why I just got funded by the NIH to study exactly what the neural basis of that is. But it's obviously very complex, right? The hand, the whole arm is 28 dimensions of movement. So it's extremely difficult. It's remarkable how good we are generally at tracking it, given how complex that space of possible movements are. But I can't tell you exactly, how that could go wrong. And you should come to the lab sometime and maybe we can do some experiments. Yeah. Unfortunately, right. So that brings a good point so we're working on touch. Everything I've mentioned is touch. But of course, tracking where this prosthesis is in space is very important too, right? The problem is, we don't even know enough about that to know how to replace it in the prosthetic. That's why I have this NIH-funded research program. Well, not the only reason, but one of the reasons I have this NIH-funded research program is let's understand how proprioception is represented in the brain so that we can then replace it in these patient populations.
The fundamental way that we distinguish self from non-self is by the sense of touch.
Yep.
If I touch myself, I feel from the finger touch, and I also feel from my body.
Yep.
Whereas if I touch a table, I only feel the
That's
finger
right.
touch. So now you could set up robots to distinguish self from non-self by putting in enough sensors throughout the robotic body.
Well, except that they have to be, well, they kind of have to be attached to a brain, right?
Yeah.
I think the minute you use the word self, there has to be a brain in the equation,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But yes, absolutely. I mean, you could easily imagine if you replace the sensory input in the appropriate way to the brain, you could replace the whole body with a robotic body, as long as it's like every time you touch here, the right part of the brain, this part of the robotic body, the right part of the brain gets activated, boom. If there's a systematic relationship, the idea is if there's a systematic relationship between what you see is happening to your body and what you feel through the sense of touch, I think you're going to start embodying that thing. But of course, we'll see how far you can take it. I think you can only take that so far, but that's speculation on my part.
Do you imagine that you could take it the next step further and that the touch could be distinguished vis-a-vis smooth and grainy surfaces?
I'm so glad you asked that question.
Hot and cold.
I did not pay her to ask that question. So it happens that one of the huge programs of research in my lab is to understand texture perception.
Yeah.
So that's a huge program of research. I can talk about texture perception on Blue in the Face. I won't do that now. But the next thing, what we're actually currently working on. So now I specified early on that we're working in this. What I talked about today was like force, contact location, contact force. I didn't talk about contact timing, but so very, very basic information. What we're doing now, though, is trying to now create this multi-dimensional sort of information. So when you grasp an object, you have information about its size, its shape, its texture, whether it's moving across the skin. And so we're trying now. And we know a lot about all these things. Like texture, I'm studying that in my lab. Shape and motion, I've studied in the past. So I know how the brain represents these things. Well, I have some information about how the brain represents these things. So I want to tap into these existing representations, leverage what is known about how the brain represents these different dimensions of touch, and try to create these multidimensional sort of naturalistic perceptions. So that's exactly where we're going right now.
Does this have any implication for conditions like that condition where people can't feel any pain, any heat?
So that's a
I
good
can't remember the
point.
name of that condition.
No, is the short answer. But so temperature is an issue, right? Because temperature is very important. The other thing I didn't talk about that this really paves the way for is the emotional importance of touch. If you ask tetraplegic patients, right, one of the things they miss the most is touching a loved one, right?
Yeah.
And so there's this idea of, I'll be able to, they talk about, I wish I could just hold my wife's hand or whatever, that kind of thing. And so they will be able to again, right? But we won't be able to represent one of the things that's key. There's a huge thermal component to touching people, right? If they don't feel like metal, they don't feel like, whatever, they're not painfully hot. They have just in that right nice zone of warmth. And the problem is, so we could, in theory, reproduce this thermal quality, except the problem is, through stimulation of the brain, warmth and pain are closely intertwined. So it's very hard to stimulate the brain in the thermal areas without causing painful sensations. And one of the nice thing about these arms is that they never have to feel pain through the arm, right? First of all, if you destroy the arm, it's not the end of the world. Just spend $500,000 on another one. Actually, that's a really generous estimate. Hopefully one day it'll be cheaper. But the point is that you can also create algorithms in the arm itself that say, if you're about to be damaged, just withdraw. And that's what pain systems are for. It's just to try to tell us, okay, get away from this. You're being damaged. Well, just get a robot to rip it all.
Is this transferable to sort of a leg amputee or a foot amputee?
Right.
Because I would imagine
Great question.
you can feel your foot is much easier to walk, to relearn to walk.
Absolutely. So that's a fantastic question. So the thing about the leg is, there's a guy who ran in the Olympics, right, with prosthetic effects, right? So, legs are much less of a problem because the arm, like I sort of mentioned earlier, 28 degrees of freedom. So it's a thing where there's just so many things that you need to keep track of in the arm. And it does so many various things like playing piano, typing on a keyboard, writing with a pen, punching someone in the face. So you really, there's not this sort of program that you sort of use over and over like walking, right? Walking or even running. And that being said, sensory feedback from the feet is important for walking on uneven terrain and things like that. So there's definitely applications for lower limb prostheses, but my feeling is, in the short term at least, the invasiveness of the surgeries, the dangers associated with the surgery, probably outweigh that small benefit that you would get from being able to walk on uneven terrain. I mean, it's pretty spectacular what can be done with lower limb prostheses with all this stuff.
I was really interested in what you were saying about the emotional component of touch, and I was wondering if there's been any research about the way stimulation of what we were talking about with the sensory motor cortex, how that affects other areas of the brain, and if there's a way in which the sensory cortex not being stimulated by touch in this way has effects on like the limbic system or other areas of the brain.
No. I'm pretty sure no one has done serious work on that. But it's almost certainly going to have an impact. If you just think of principles of how the brain works, right? There's this plasticity and there's this expectation of input, and when that input is no longer there, that affects everything. Everything is sort of interconnected in some way. So I'm sure it has. But on the other hand, I'm thinking about another answer to that question. There is this weird condition that I love because it's reversible, so it's not horrible and devastating. It's a peripheral neuropathy where people have this temporary loss of sensory feedback, right, for months or weeks or months. I mean, it sucks for them for a while. But it's really interesting to see how devastating it is. I mean, those people look like they just do not have motor systems anymore. So they can't stand, they can't, everything they do, they're looking at their hand and it takes them forever to do everything. But sometimes they recover from that. And when they recover from that, it's like, nothing was ever gone. Right? So, in a way, so when that input is gone from the brain, that doesn't mean that these brain areas are no longer active. They're still sending signals to other parts of the brain. So you don't completely atrophy those connections, and I don't think it's as devastating as you might fear. But there's definitely some effect.
Sliman, that was great. And I wondered about the strength thing. You mentioned you don't want to crush someone's hand, or shake their hands, or crush a tennis ball. But can you you have a way to balance the sort of settings or the power of these limbs and these prosthetic limbs? Would you want to do that? Would they be set so the balance with an existing limb?
I see. Right. So it wouldn't be so much better than the other.
But could the person flick a switch and I can have superpower and do it?
Well, look,
things.
I hope this isn't bug or there are no drones. But you have to remember this is for the Department of Defense, right? And the stated goal in the original white paper for this project is to take soldiers that lost a limb or something on the field, instrument them with this thing so they can go back on the field, right? Okay. So, which apparently, and you talk to veterans, they're like, man, I would love it if I could do that. It's like, wow, you and I are very different people. We're not at that stage yet. I mean, definitely in theory, I made the monkeys as good with the prosthetic hand as they are with the native hand. I could have made them much better. Could have made much worse. There's a knob you can turn to. So there's definitely, a potential for, the $6 million man, for those of you who know what that means, potential for enhancement, absolutely. Now, I'm just trying to think, if I had one of these arms, would I want it to be as weak as my other arm, or would I want it to be stronger than my other arm? I would go for the latter.
It's the same.
So it's harm myself.
Have it balanced.
But one thing, so I'm answering, half seriously your question, but one thing that I should mention is that there's all kinds of important, your arm, when you interact with objects, it gives a little bit, right? There's some give. The mechanical impedance of your hand is not infinite. It actually doesn't resist completely to deformation. And it's very important that these robotic arms also resist. I don't know if you can see from the video, but if you push on the finger, it's not just completely rigid. You can sort of manipulate that aspect of it. So I guess the answer to your question is yes. You can. Those are all under computer control. Actually, it's very important also to realize that this is very much at an early stage, right? I mean, this is the first anthropomorphic robotic hand. This one, actually, there's now 5 or 6, but all of them have been developed over the last 10 years and the most, right? And have only come online in the last few years. The guy who made the Segway has another really good one. Dean Kamen has another really good robotic, much cheaper one. It's like, that one is only a few $100,000. This one is like $2 million pop. That's a little bit simpler, but has some of these important sort of biocompatible properties.
And that, I've already had 2, but
Go ahead.
it's come up a little bit in some of the answers, or possibly, is the role of memory in sensation of touch? We talk
Right.
about the person missing, holding their loved one's hand, and can you make new memories for people who've never had the feeling
Ooh.
of touch?
So that's actually called Bonitas question, right? With vision, where if you took somebody who had been blind their entire life and then magically restored their sight, could they tell a sphere from a cube, right? And the answer is absolutely not, they couldn't. That's the short answer. But, why I chuckle a little bit when I read stuff on Bonitas question, which my mother, who's a philosopher, happened to study a while back, so I make fun of her. It's a very complex neuroscientific question, right? There's, visual representations or somatosensory representations happen at many different levels. You have a representation of the stimulus in the nerve, a representation of the stimulus in the brainstem, in the thalamus, and various areas of the brain, and there's these complex elaboration of the stimulus. So of course, if you have 0 experience, there's no elaboration, and so you have to learn everything from scratch. And no one has done these experiments, but humans at least. But one thing that is pretty clear if you look at the literature is in adulthood, it's very hard to learn a whole sensory modality from scratch. In infancy, it's trivial because of course every infant does it, but in adulthood, it's very difficult. You can modify things a little bit, like create new tactile memories, but you can't. Well, I don't know for sure, but I don't think you can learn a whole body representation that way, because the brain gets less and less plastic. In fact, it's incredibly plastic until about teenagehood, and then the plasticity just tanks, which is good, I think. It's good in a lot of ways because you don't want to be constantly rewiring and relearning things. You kind of create these nice stable representations, you stabilize them, and then you just tweak them. And that's sort of the idea. But actually, that brings another point. Now, I want to make sure that I don't mislead you into thinking that stimulation of the brain creates these perfectly normal percepts, like, oh yes, it's like a pressure being exerted on my hand. No. We're creating unnatural patterns of activation in the brain. There's no question about that. What we try to do is capture some aspect of that brain activation, the critical aspect of that brain activation to convey specific types of information like force and force and contact pressure in space. And so where learning is going to come in is to sort of map these sort of unnatural sensations, right? These unnatural but hopefully meaningful sensations into increasingly natural ones. Eventually, I think there's a chance that the patients will learn to feel things more naturally. They'll adapt to this artificial sensory input. But again, we'll know this now in a year. A year from now, you should re-invite me here, and I will tell you what the answer to that question is.
Invited.
Let's end on that.
Thank you.
We thank you for listening to or viewing our podcast. For more information and for other podcasts, please see our website, divinity.uchicago.edu/podcasts. Copyright, the University of Chicago Divinity School.